And I remember thinking immediately, oh, this is the key.
Joe Rogan and The Rock echo ancient biblical truth that will convict most Christians. Most of the time, when Christians are convicted by a message they hear, it's usually from something their pastor says on a Sunday morning, maybe something you learn in a small group accountability, or maybe a book you read. But this time, it's two of the biggest names in media who are not professing Christians as far as I know, unpacking a biblical concept that at this point in their life, they're both experts on. But you may be thinking, how can non-Christians ever be experts on a biblical concept? What is actually a theological concept called the doctrine of common grace that explains all of it. And it's crazy when you think about it. This is how the Gospel Coalition explains it. Common grace includes all undeserved blessings that natural man receives from the hand of God. Rain, sun, prosperity, health, happiness, natural capacities and gifts, sin being restrained from complete dominion. The doctrine of common grace explains how man can be depraved and yet still commit acts that are good. This common grace, however, falls short of salvific grace. All humans still need the saving work of the Spirit to reconcile them to God. So this means that even though The Rock and Joe Rogan aren't Christians yet, common grace says that through life experience and through the goodness of God, they could be experts in a biblical concept that we as Christians could even learn from. But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. If it's not your first time watching a video, you might as well subscribe. What are you doing? Let's jump into this video. So I got to give you guys a heads up.
Had your kids, had your wife.
Explicit, explicit,
explicit.
All right, so this is the 23-minute mark.
I realized when I was young, I got a development deal for Disney when I was, I think I was 25, 26. And I got this development deal, and all of a sudden they gave me like, I think it was like $100,000. And I had money in the bank. I was like, this is crazy. Because I felt lighter.
So
I was like 26, I think.
Yeah.
And I was.
Development deal, 25, 26, $100,000. I couldn't imagine this, but listen to this profound point he's going to make.
It was a development deal for a television show, and all of a sudden I had money. Like my whole life I was poor, and my whole life I was like wondering how I was going to, when I was on my own, and it was like, how am I paying the bills? How am I eating? You know,
the irony of him getting a development deal, I think he said from Disney, is very interesting in hindsight of everything Disney has become.
Then the moment I got that check, I remember feeling light.
Yeah.
Like weight had been lifted off me. Like now I didn't have to worry about my rent. Now I didn't have to worry about food. And I remember thinking immediately, oh, this is the key.
Okay, tell me if you catch the principle here. Listen very closely and tell me if you catch the gem that Rogan is about to drop in this moment.
You just got to not get to a place where you're not worried about your bills. If that means like spend less money, if that means like live a more prudent lifestyle, whatever you have to do. But get to that place where you're not worried about bills, because that shit hanging over your head causes stress that ruins lives. It ruins people.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, okay, now the most important thing is make sure you don't lose any ground here and keep going, because now you know what it's like to be successful. Continue that. Do it.
Okay. Did you guys catch it? Did you guys catch the specific point that he made here? We'll play a little bit more and then bring it back, and let's see if you guys caught it.
Not worried about your bills. If that means like spend less money, if that means like live a more prudent lifestyle, whatever you have to do. But get to that place where you're not worried about bills, because that.
Okay, get to that place where you're not worried about bills. Okay, so I want to point you guys to a proverb, and then we're going to look at another video from Jordan Peterson that's actually mind-blowing. Rogan said, get to that place where you don't have to worry about bills, okay? If that means decreasing your expenses, if that means living on less, okay? Proverbs 21:20 says, there is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up. Okay, there is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up. Ancient wisdom from the Proverbs. Living on less than what you make, learning how to make, how to build your situation where you aren't living afraid of how you're going to make rent, is the beginning unlock of going in a different direction, whether that's with your career, whether that's with a ministry, or wherever you want to go. It's just first getting to a place where you are not living hand to mouth. Okay. This principle right here, not living paycheck to paycheck, was the initial step towards me transitioning from working with adults with developmental disabilities and YMCA jobs to then working at my church and then eventually going full-time as an entrepreneur in 2015 was this exact principle. What am I talking about? I'm talking about me and my wife going on a debt-free journey where we paid off before I was popping with music, before I was popping with YouTube, before I was making any money doing any of this stuff, we paid off $100,000 in debt in 18 months. Okay? She was working 2 jobs. I was working 2 jobs. And we completely decreased all of our overhead. And we had so much debt. We had car loans. We had student loans. We had credit card loans. We had every kind of debt. And this principle from Proverbs of decreasing your overhead is extremely important. Why? Because it creates margin. It creates margin. And living on less than what you make creates margin. You know, the average American lives on more than what they make. The average American lives on more than what they make. And so let me show you some of the things that I learned going through this. This is directly from the program that we went through. It's called FPU. I'm actually going to be taking people at my church through it, I believe in January. Okay, so it says, make a budget and stick to it. Have you ever gotten near the end of the month and started to worry you wouldn't have enough money to make it to your next paycheck? Plenty of folks are in that position every day where it feels like you've got more month than money. Thankfully, there's a solution to this problem: budgeting. Seriously, Jesus talked about the importance of making a budget while teaching his followers in Luke 14:28. For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Okay, so budgeting. Now, Jesus specifically is talking about counting the cost here in context of salvation and following him, right? But the principle remains: you need to have a plan. In the house of the wise, there's choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all that he has. So if you are devouring everything you have every single month, the Bible says that's what a foolish man does. I didn't say it. I said that's what the Bible says. And that's where we were at. We were just, everything that came in, we spent. Everything that came in, we spent. And so that created stress and tension in our marriage because there was no margin. Margin is when you, hypothetically, let's say you make $5,000 a month, right? And if you have to spend $5,000 a month on bills, can you make $5,000 a month? You have no margin, right? But if you are living less on what you make, meaning that, say your bills only come up to $3,500 a month and you make $5,000 a month. Now there's that buffer, right? Now there's that buffer to be able to have that $1,500 to save, to pay off debt, right? And if we're going to go deeper, that buffer can also allow you to take certain risks, as Joe Rogan talked about, right? He was able to get stable, then he was able to take risk and go into doing things like launching his podcast, right? Now, most of us aren't going to go on to launch the biggest podcast in the world, but we still want to decrease our overhead so we could increase our capacity to give, increase our capacity to save, and increase our capacity to potentially pivot, try a career or a job.
Hanging over your head causes stress that ruins lives. It ruins people.
Yeah.
And
living paycheck to paycheck without any margin causes stress that ruins lives. Have some margin, keep going, right? Why? To mitigate stress, to mitigate the burden and the tension that money problems and financial issues cause us. Now, check out this very, very fascinating clip from Jordan Peterson. This is way back in the day.
You find is, you always hear this idea that poverty causes crime. That's a classic left-wing idea, but it's wrong. It's seriously wrong, and it's importantly wrong, and it's definitively wrong. Not only that, so there's no argument about this. It's already been established. What causes crime, especially aggressive crime, is relative poverty.
Now listen closely. What causes crime is relative poverty. Okay, why is this important? You can mitigate the stress, and we could do that on a macro level. We can mitigate a lot of the issues in our society. And listen to how Jordan Peterson unpacks this.
And relative poverty is not the same thing as poverty at all. It's seriously not the same thing. Poverty is when you don't have enough to eat. Relative poverty is when the guy next door has a much better car than you. So, and there's lots of relative poverty in the United States, and there's some absolute poverty, but even the absolute poverty in the United States is nothing like the absolute poverty, say, in places like India or in sub-Saharan Africa.
Did you guys catch it? There is relative poverty. Relative poverty is different than absolute poverty. And this notion that poverty is what causes crime and what causes all these things, he's saying is not true.
Where absolute poverty means you have nothing. Now, what's really interesting about the Gini coefficient is that if you go in places where everyone, roughly speaking, is poor, say by national standards, I think South Dakota was often used as an example, or maybe one of the maritime provinces, like Newfoundland, where there's low average income, but it's pretty flat distribution. There's almost no crime. And if you go to places where everyone's rich, then there's almost no crime. But if you go places where there are poor people and moderately well-off people and rich people, and the distribution is really steep, then the rate of aggressive behavior among young men, and it's usually within their own ethnic group, starts to skyrocket out of control. And the reason for that seems to be that if the dominance hierarchy is too steep, then the young men have no likelihood of climbing to a dominant position while playing the standard social game. And so what they do is turn to aggression.
So when there's too much relative poverty, meaning you live in a zip code, and then there are people who are 25 times as wealthy as you that are just one street over, one block over, one drive over, that comparison is what drives, according to Jordan Peterson, the intensity of playing the social dominance hierarchy game is what drives young men to aggression.
Looking for status in a place where status is hard to achieve, and you're the meanest, toughest guy around, then, and around a bunch of people who, like you, don't have much money, then you're going to benefit from that status. It works. Yeah.
Interesting, right? This is Proverbs chapter 30, verse 7 and 8. It says, "Oh God, I beg 2 favors from you. Let me have them before I die. First, help me never to tell a lie. Second, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' And if I am poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name." We see Jesus in Matthew 6:11 in the Lord's Prayer saying, "Give us today our daily bread." And so what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is that the lack of structure and stability in one's life creates unnecessary stress, unnecessary heartache, unnecessary tension, a lack of calculated risk to improve one's situation. And so foundationally, what I had to do in my own life was first get financially stable before I can go build a YouTube channel, before I could go build a music career, before I could go build a small business. I had to first stop living paycheck to paycheck. I had to first get to a place where I was earning more and decreasing my overhead to get out of debt. And then all of a sudden I was able to take more risk and had more stability and functionality in my day-to-day life. And this stuff is important because when we consider where we are positioned on a global scale, right? The average income in America, the average household in America, Americans are in the top % of the wealth globally. Like most of us, if you're coming from an average household, 60K a year, you're in the 1%. You're in 1% globally speaking, right? And like Jordan Peterson pointed out, absolute poverty is different than relative poverty. What we're dealing with here is relative poverty. We're dealing with, hey, there was the city over, this person has more. And so you always think of yourself as less than because someone else always has something more when it comes to a financial aspect. But that's just not true. When you think of yourself globally, you realize how blessed we are. And to whom much is given, much is required. Right. And so that's why I think this stuff is important for us to get a grip of this financial literacy, to understand how to decrease our overhead, how to get on a budget, how to live on less than what we make, how to give consistently. Right. And eventually we start moving the needle. We start moving it further and further into walking out this financial literacy that we see all throughout the book of Proverbs, all throughout the parables of Jesus. And it's in our best interest to get aligned with God's thing. And again, to me, the first thing we did is we just followed the Dave Ramsey baby steps. We got on a budget. We got $1,000 emergency fund. We debt snowballed our debts from smallest to largest, and then we saved 6 months of living expenses. And those were the exact steps I made until I transitioned and went full time with music in 2015, and then eventually went full time with YouTube in 2020. So,
look, sometimes people struggle with quiet time because you're like, I don't know what to do. Yeah, so I got this Bless God prayer journal. So look, they got a section. I got praise reports, things I'm grateful for, prayers for other people, personal prayers, memory verse, I will get this done today, then my time in the Word showed me, and notes just for free thinking. This thing's mad helpful. Just writing down things that you're grateful for, just doing that consistently, that's another really good way to fight depression and anxiety, because it's I don't know if it's impossible, but it's really difficult to experience the feelings of depression and everything and truly be genuinely grateful for something and dwelling on something that you're grateful for. This actually is really helpful for that as well.